my name's Hector Martinez. I'm the Channel Sales and Educational Manager for a company called DxO Labs. And at DxO, what we do is we actually create image processing software for all demanding and serious photographers. And just out of curiosity, like just by a show of hands, how many of us have actually heard of DxO? Okay, so there's a good share amount of people here. Okay, so there's two sides of DxO. There's our embedded side where we evaluate image quality on a day-to-day basis, and then there's our consumer side where we actually create image processing software for us end users to benefit off of. So what DxO Optics Pro is, it actually allows us to aim for the best image quality, giving us an actual camera raw file that is pretty much free of artifacts. So not only that, but it just so happened to, we just so happen to achieve doing this automatically. So there's no overwhelming, post-production techniques that are needed. This is strictly based off of actual laboratory results. So just out of curiosity, how many of us in this room are shooting RAW? Cool. RAW and JPEG? JPEG? Okay. So whether if you're shooting RAW, whether if you're shooting RAW JPEG, we have a solution for you that you can adapt to. So that was actually a good share amount of hands. I've personally seen camera hardware spend hours, if not days, in the hands of our talented technicians who actually shoot in several lighting conditions as well as shooting conditions. The end result of this is actually a database that actually has well over 10,000 dedicated optical and sensor modules. So while everyone else is providing us with a generic fix, we're actually the only ones in the world who are actually going into our laboratories, studying these pieces of glass, studying these sensors, actually putting the two pieces together, and then studying the flaws as a whole to give you the best image quality over any post-production company in the world. Okay, so not only do we do that, but based off of our camera hardware characterizations and our modules, we're actually capable of doing things like shooting up to ISOs well over 100,000 ISO and completely getting rid of all that noise. Not only are we capable of getting rid of that digital noise, but we're also capable of removing dead and hot pixels, something that you would physically have to send back to the camera manufacturer in order for them to repair. We're capable of fixing through software because we know all the ins and outs about that individual sensor that you're using. Okay, so just out of curiosity, like I always ask this question when I'm usually doing lectures so I know in which direction to go, but just by a show of hands, like how many of us are having major issues with noise per se? I usually have problems with noise. Lens sharpness, that's another problem I commonly have. Distortion as well. Okay, so just off of those couple of things that we just mentioned, we just so happen to correct automatically. So as far as we actually correct for four optical flaws by default automatically. That's distortion, that's vignetting, that's chromatic aberration, and one of my personal favorite features in DxO Optics Pro 8, which you will only find in Optics Pro 8, is a really nice feature called lens softness. And I'm actually going to get into a demonstration later on about all these different types of optical flaws and actually how we work around them to fix them. So by any means, we're not like a post-production software. We don't create layers. We don't create masks. In layman's terms, pretty much what we're doing at DxO, we're fixing what's broken. And I hate to say this, but we're fixing what's broken between the combination of the lens and the sensor. You can go right now and go to any one of these sales reps and buy a camera or a lens off over the counter. I guarantee you that that lens or that sensor has some sort of flaws in it. Nothing's perfect. These things are made on assembly lines, and they all have their share of flaws. So that being said, what else can we talk about? We also correct for photos with an automatic feature to prevent blown out highlights, which is really nice. And this is all thanks to the extreme measurements that are made in our laboratories. For every camera that we work on, we're actually capable of shooting ISOs well over clear 100,000 ISO and completely getting rid of all that dead noise. We also offer an extremely unique feature which is the equivalent of a fill-in flash, but called the DxO Smart Lighting tool, all right? We also give the option, and this is like a really, really cool feature, we also give you the option to actually emulate the color rendering of any camera that you could possibly think of. So just out of curiosity, does anyone here shoot events once in a while, like weddings? Okay, cool. So you shoot events. Okay, so a common problem that you might have as an event photographer is when you're shooting with multiple camera bodies, your main issue is color rendering, which is color balance, as we would say. So you can have the same camera, all three of the same camera, or three different individual cameras, but you can't maintain that color uniformity because these sensors intend to go through something we call a color shift. And this is caused by oxidation, this is caused by humidity. What makes DxO so, yeah, like even when these cameras are being mass produced and they're in like these canisters being shipped from like Japan or China, all that humidity, all that oxygen, it starts to work its way to the sensor. That's why we can pull like 3 of the same cameras right now and shoot the same exact thing, and you'll notice the color balance is off on each individual camera. So at DxO, what we do is we actually provide a dedicated ICC color balance in our laboratories ahead of time. So now, what's really cool is, like, let's say me, you, and this gentleman right here are all at the same job, right? You're shooting, you're the head photographer, so you're shooting, if you don't mind me asking, what do you shoot?
Music videos.
Okay, videos? Okay. Okay, so let's say if you're shooting like a Canon camera and I'm shooting a Sony and he just so happens to be shooting Nikon, you can actually, through our color rendering software, actually sync up the color in all those individual files. So you're shooting a CR2, I'm shooting a Sony file, he's shooting a NIF file. You can actually apply that color ICC standard across the whole entire workflow, and you won't know which image came out of what camera because that color uniformity has been synced, which, if you think about it, as an event photographer, that's going to save you so much time because half the battle is usually color rendering in the labs. We also provide a perspective control feature, which helps you with like slanted buildings or tilted horizons, things of that nature. But I'm not just going to bore you talking about DxO all day because I really don't feel that people really get the grasp of the software. So we're actually going to show you a couple of things. And there's so much of the software to go over. I'm actually just going to talk about what stood out to me as a professional photographer, and I thought that was extremely useful. So this is DxO Optics Pro 8. Over here we have our Organize tab, and right now I'm just going to give you a little walkthrough. We have our Organize tab, which actually gives you full capability of tapping into your main directory without having to import your images. So we're tapping directly right into the hard drive. We have our Customize tab. Our Customize tab, not only is it giving us a laboratory result, but at our own discretion, we're also capable of fine-tuning to our own liking, where we actually have full control of your navigator, your EXIF information, your preset editor. And then over here on my right-hand side, where all the palettes are at, this is where all the magic happens. And then we have our processing tab, where we can process as a JPEG, a TIFF, a DNG. I even created some presets for my website, and as well as for like occasional prints when they come along here and there. So right now I'm actually going to talk about the DxO Smart Lighting tool, but before I talk about the DxO Smart Lighting tool, I'd actually like to explain what it does and how it works. So what the DxO Smart Lighting tool is, it's actually a tool that corrects for the light and contrast of an image, allowing us end users to keep full control over this image, which helps us recover details and highlights and shadows in certain areas that we wouldn't be able to maintain. So here's an image of the Bellagio that I shot in Vegas, and I'm pretty sure if we all asked right now, on an average day, realistically, how many of us would look at this image and trash it out? I know I would, because it's underexposed. Nor do I want to put myself through all this overwhelming post-production techniques in order to bring this image out. So what we can do now is we can actually tap into DxO Optics Pro 8. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to look under the light and color palette. So here goes your light and color palette. And just to let you know, just by utilizing and working out of your light and color palette, you can pretty much accommodate up to 90% of your workflow out of just using that one palette, that one individual palette. So I'm going to tap into the DxO Smart Lighting palette. I'm going to switch from custom, and we're going to go over to medium and turn the lights on. Okay? But it gets a little bit better. Say if Brahma in the back says, you know what, Hector, that's a little bit under for me. How about we bump it up a little bit? Okay, let's give the Brahma what he wants. So here's the image as it was shot. And here's the image after it was corrected based off of laboratory results, still giving me the capability of fine-tuning at my own discretion. Yes, sir.
How did you revert back to the original?
Okay. There's actually two things. If you want to revert back to as it was shot, you could do two things. You could simply just take your cursor and hold down on the image, and it'll revert back to the original image itself. And then once you let go, you'll actually see the corrected preview. Or if you want to see a before and after, you could do what we like to call a dual mode, which you can see the image as it was shot and then the corrected preview. But I'm pretty sure we can all agree for something that we were just about to trash out has just become a keeper now. Another tool that, let me see if I can give you another really good example of the DxO Smart Lighting tool and how strong it is. Okay, this is another good example right here. So, information is completely lost, right? What I was purposely doing here was I was actually shooting an HDR image. And just out of curiosity, how many of us are familiar with HDR? Okay, cool. So what I was doing was I was actually bracketing for 3 multiple images in order to create this HDR. But the beauty about it is when you're using DxO, there's no need for bracketed images. Considering the fact that we've studied these sensors so well, there's no need for a tripod. There's no need for a shutter release. We're actually creating something called a single shot HDR. Okay? So first I'd like to just show you what I'm capable of doing with the DxO Smart Lighting tool. Then after that, I'm actually going to turn this image into an HDR image. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. So first what I'd like to do is obviously I'm going to turn on these lights. There's highlights and shadow information that's been recovered that you could not recover using any other post-production software in the world. Only we're capable of digging up this type of information. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this image into an HDR image. So before I start doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to our Apply Presets, and I'm actually going to go down to HDR single shot. So just by a show of hands, are we on the artistic side or are we on the realistic side? I'm more realistic. How about you guys? Let's go for realistic, right on. Okay, so we're gonna go for realistic right now. Okay, let's adjust that a little bit. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna tap into the color rendering of this actual camera that I use. So what I'm gonna do is, and this is one thing about color rendering I love. Considering the fact that I have like a color science background, like color is really important to me. So what we're gonna do now is we're actually gonna select camera body. I'm gonna select the ICC profile that was dedicated for this 5D Mark II, which was already created in our laboratories based off of a 24 scientifically formulated color target. So we're gonna switch over to that. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to protect my saturated colors. I'm going to recover some of my highlights, bring out some of these midtones. Let's bring out some of these blacks just by a little bit. Landscape. Let's just bump up the saturation and noise. Okay, and let's bring this up just a little bit Okay, so there goes your single shot HDR. So keep in mind, considering the fact that now we're actually capable of creating these single shot HDRs, now we can actually afford to like photograph people, photograph water without having to worry about that one major issue that we always have when we're shooting HDR, ghosting or dragging of an image, walking by, a person walking by or something like that. And then we're gonna go back to the actual image as it was shot.
Are you accomplishing the same thing with the slider as using the strong, medium?
No, actually, all I'm doing, utilizing the DxO Smart Lighting tool, is adjusting the the lighting of the image. So what I'm doing is I'm turning all that negative energy, and I'm actually bringing it out so that we can actually see it now.
How is it different if you pick the different mode of the smart lighting?
Oh yeah, it would definitely, you see a dramatic change. Like if I go to slight, it's just not good enough. If I go into medium, you see a bit of a difference. If I go into strong, there we go. But I'm actually gonna go into custom mode because it's a bit under, and now it looks right. So here goes your before, and here goes your after. Before and after. Okay. So now we're going to talk about another tool that really stood out to me, which was the tool that you just saw me work out of a little bit, the selective tone tool. The selective tone tool is extremely strong. I mean, considering the fact that I can individually control my highlights, my midtones, my shadows, and my blacks, the tool is extremely, extremely effective. So I just want to show you another example of the DxO Smart Lighting tool. So let's, okay, here's another good example. All right, image completely lost. I like using multiple images so people can see the difference. Yes, sir. Yeah, by default, I mean, as far as the 4 optical flaws that we're correcting by default, that's vignetting, chromatic aberration, lens softness, and distortion, and by default, noise is a part of that corrections automatically by default. So figure if we're complaining about what 1200 ISO looks like, and you'll see a really good example of our denoising tool. That's actually what made us famous, our denoising tool.
So that's a particular step in your, it's not something that's done automatically.
It's by default, it's an automatic feature, yes, the denoising tool. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about noise. We worry about it for you.
Where does this fit in your workflow? You only process this through from the raw file, and how do you save the file? I mean, in what format is it saved?
Oh, okay, yeah, we'll get into that. Well, pretty much what we're really considered is a pre-post production software. We're not like any other Photoshops who create layers or masks or dodging or burning. We're fixing what's broken first so that you can bring the best image quality into those applications and get the most out of it. As far as processing, I mean, you can process to whatever your heart desires, a JPEG, a DNG, a TIFF, 8-bit, 16-bit. You can even create your own personal presets for like your websites or printing templates. Me personally, when I'm working out of DxO Optics Pro, what I intend to do is I do all my pre-post production work out of DxO Optics Pro 8. I save as a 16-bit TIFF, and then I bring into one of those other post-production softwares where I can create my layers and my mask or my composites. So when it comes to DxO Optics Pro 8, I mean, when you hear DxO, just what you're really thinking about is image quality. We're giving you the best image quality over anyone else. I mean, even down to like our dedicated modules, I mean, you can get lost in our dedicated modules for days. This is actually an image that I took upstate, and we're actually going to utilize the DxO Smart Lighting tool for this, and I'm just going to so happen to be in the custom. So this is the image as it was shot, and obviously as you can see there's a lot of information that's missing, but once we use that slider, the DxO Smart Lighting tool, there she goes. Lights back on. So keep in mind, if I was in some like really overwhelming post-production software, it would literally take me 15-20 minutes to be able to achieve these type of results. Not only that, my history palette's probably going to be filled with all these layer masks and adjustment layers and all this other nonsense. And keep in mind, like, for someone who doesn't have that background and that training in these different types of post-production software, they're just going to end up being really flustered. Yes, sir?
How do you handle overblown images?
Oh, blown out images? Oh, I got something for you. Okay, that's a special request. I'll show you something really nice that you'll like that. Yes, sir? This is a standalone application. Yes, sir, it is. This is a standard standalone application that actually gives you global corrections with the availability to fine-tune at your own discretion.
No Photoshop needed.
Huh?
No Photoshop needed.
No, nope, not needed. You would only need that application unless we're trying to create like composites or like all these fancy like, you know, digital designs, because originally that application was made for multimedia graphics, you know, web designers, photographers, people who create websites, or illustrators. It's an open source application that we just so happen to reap the benefits off of. Okay, so now we're actually going to get into the selective tone tool. And before we get into the selective tone tool, once again, I want to talk about it. I want to explain what it does, how it works. And what the selective tone tool is, it's actually a tool that's capable of allowing us to correct for brightness and highlights and shadow details for better, and not even better, but great results. So this is actually a really good example of how this is going to be actually a merge of the DxO Smart Lighting tool plus the selective tone tool working together in conjunction. So right now what I'm going to do is, first things first I want to do is I want to turn on the lights. I want to see the bark on that tree, right? Seeing is believing, people. Okay, so now we're going to adjust some of those nasty highlights. So we're actually going to drop the highlights down to like maybe, I don't know, I'm going to go somewhere, I'm going to stay somewhere in the 40s. Now we're going to adjust our midtones. Probably drop those somewhere in the 40s too. Okay. Okay, now we're going to let's adjust some of those blacks. There you go. So this is an image. This is an image that was worked together in conjunction with the DxO Smart Lighting tool and our selective tone tool. And now I'm actually going to show you the before, as shot, and here goes your corrected preview. So I didn't lose 15, 20 minutes of my life, 30 minutes of my life, nor did I even break a sweat. Okay, so now let's get into another example. I like showing different types of images because I don't know what necessarily subject matter everyone's shooting. Me personally, I specialize in street and field and third world country photography. I like getting lost with the backpack on my back for days in third world countries and documenting them. How many people shoot portraits? Portraits, anyone? Okay. Landscapes? Nature? Cool. Okay, so this is all important stuff that you could actually apply to your own digital workflow. We're actually going to get into, which is a really big topic that I like to discuss, color rendering. It's one of my most favorite subjects. It could be a bit overwhelming subject, but before you get into color rendering and before you get the most out of your images, if there's one thing I could recommend, it's something called a colorimeter. It's what a colorimeter does, it creates a custom ICC profile for your monitor. And the reason why you want to purchase these is because you want to see what you actually shot. Like there's a lot of times I'm teaching workshops and stuff like that, and before people start getting into post-production with all these fancy softwares, they're doing all like this fancy stuff and their monitors are not properly color rendered, and I'm just like, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot by doing this because you can't actually see the colors accurately. So when they bring me their images and they're like, oh, you got to check this out, you know, see how it looks, and I'm just like, the colors are way off, but they're like, oh, but it looks so great when I was at home. The reason for that being was because their system wasn't calibrated. So a calibration is something that you constantly want to do at least once a month. You have to practice it. It's part of the nature. But right here, what we're going to talk about is color rendering. So before I do that, I want to explain how it works and what it does and where you can locate it in our application. So the color rendering palette can actually be located under the Light and Color Advanced palette. So here goes our color rendering. Okay, so you have your categories, you have your rendering, you have your intensity, and a really new feature that we just implemented, which is really important, I thought, for anyone shooting with the CCD sensor. Nikon used to use a lot of cameras with CCD sensors, but then they just all of a sudden switched their game up and they wised up, and now they're using CMOS and they're outsourcing to Sony to make these outstanding sensors by far. But for anyone shooting a CCD chips, which intends to blow out your highlights and your shadow details and give you those really oversaturated colors, this is a really strong tool that you might want to look at. So what the color rendering does, it works automatically to prevent saturated colors from being oversaturated. There's also been some major updates on some cameras that we've worked on in the labs. I'm trying to think of the ones off the top of my head, but the ones that I can think off the top of my head are the Canon 5Ds, the Nikon D700, the D800's been improved a little bit as far as color rendering. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to protect the saturated color. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zoom in to a 1:1 ratio, and I'm going to get right on top of this image. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to look into our EXIF information editor, and we can clearly see that this image was shot with the Nikon D3. So what I'm going to do is now I'm actually going to tap into the color rendering under the generic rendering under category, and I'm going to go to camera body. I'm going to look up that Nikon D3 that we shot with. Here it goes, Nikon D3. Okay. And if you can, keep your main focus attention on the pollen and the petals of this flower. I'm actually going to drag my protected saturated color intensity slider, and I'm going to drag it all the way to the right. And if you can, keep your main focus attention on the petals. You're going to see all that fine detail that the camera was actually missing out on. There you go. Look how hot and vivid and oversaturated it is here. And look at all those fine little lines that we were missing out beforehand that we weren't capable of seeing. Oversaturated, as shot, corrected by DxO Optics Pro 8. Okay, so just keep in mind, like, I know one of like my major issues as a photographer, one of them besides being noise and all these other things is color. Color's a major issue. Like, if the color's not right, what's the sense? Now we're gonna get into another example. The flamingos. This is a really good one. Okay. So this was actually based and shot off of a Canon EOS 40D. So we're going to switch over to the 40D. And now, as we can see that the feathers are really oversaturated, what we're going to do is we're going to see it's oversaturated. We're going to select that magic wand. There you go. Oversaturated, fixed. And if you focus really on the flamingo's feathers right here, you can really see that hue of pink that comes back to life. And this is image quality at its best. I mean, this is a software that's completely dedicated to the camera hardware that you're using based off of camera hardware characterizations, helping us achieve cutting our workflows in less than half. And that just means you're outdoors doing what you like doing the most, you know, shooting images, capturing images. And now we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects and one of my favorite features in DxO Optics Pro 8. Just out of curiosity, how many of us have issues with like lens sharpness? I have it all the time, and it's really annoying, especially when you're shooting with like wide-angle lenses. Have you ever noticed when you're shooting a wide-angle lens that it's usually always thumbtack sharp in the center, but then your edges tend to give out? So we actually developed a really, really unique feature which you'll only find in DxO Optics Pro 8 called lens softness. It's a dedicated feature in DxO Optics Pro 8. It's a feature that's actually based off of a really advanced algorithm, and what we're doing in this algorithm, we're actually studying the center portion for sharpness, and then through then we're actually spreading that sharpness across the board in the forms of a uniformity. So that whole entire image is sharp from edge to edge. Okay, so we're actually going to give you a really good example of lens softness. Lens softness can actually be located, lens softness is really more of an optical correction. So you're gonna find that under your optical corrections palette. And I'm gonna just close some of these windows. And here goes your optical corrections palette, right? And here goes your DxO lens softness. We offer two different types of lens softness. We offer an actual dedicated lab result unsharpened mask. How many of us have fiddled around with an unsharpened mask at some given point? Okay. You know how some people can be a little too heavy-handed and they over-sharpen, where the image intends to pixelate or turns into mud, where we're actually sharpening based off of laboratory results. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to go into details and select that unsharpened mask. My next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tap into DxO lens softness and spread that uniformity across the board throughout the whole entire image, with still giving us the availability to fine-tune. But I really trust DxO and their lab results, so I'm going to just leave it as is because there's no need to fix it if it isn't broken, right? So what I'm...
The center is not very sharp in the first place.
We'll compensate for that. We'll compensate for that. So here's your split before and after. Here's the image as it was shot. This is the lens softness and the unsharpened mask. Look at all that fine detail that was recovered back. You're gonna get so much fine detail, especially if you're shooting portraits and you have a really, really good camera, where the pores on that person's face is actually gonna bother you for the first time because you can actually clearly make them out. And that's lens softness at its best. And then we also have another example. And then, you know what? I'm actually just going to spread this across the board so you can see that the uniformity has remained intact. And if you focus like on these little dimples up here, you can clearly see that that uniformity has remained intact from edge to edge, giving us an overall even, uniformed, sharp image. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's all about image quality. Let's get into another example. More of a scenery. Nice scenery, right? Kind of looks sharp, but it really isn't sharp from a distance. So let's zoom in on that to a 1:1 ratio, and you can actually locate your 1:1 ratio up on your taskbar. So we're going to zoom in on to a 1:1 ratio. What we're going to do now is I'm actually going to select unsharpened mask, and then I'm going to select DxO lens softness. And now we're going to split it in half. And if you can, keep your main focus attention on the lanterns. You can clearly see that they've been completely brought out, down all the way down to like the infrastructure of the actual building itself has been brought out. I didn't have to fiddle around with unsharpened mask. Didn't have to worry about a radius or a threshold or anything like that. This is all strictly based off of laboratory results. And now for another, what made us famous, I mean, our denoising tool by far. So which is an issue that I'm pretty sure we can all relate to. So this is an image that was shot a little bit above 51,000 ISO. So 51,000 ISO. There's a tremendous amount of digital noise. There's a lot of dead and hot pixels in this image. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna zoom into a 1:1 ratio, and we can clearly see the noise. I mean, it's as clear as day. There's nothing flattering about this image. So we have a tremendous amount of digital noise all around the reds. As far as those red dots, those are actually dead pixels. This is something that we would actually have to send the camera back to be fixed. But through software, and considering the fact that we've evaluated these sensors so well, we can clearly see all this information go away. So when it comes to noise, this is more of a details correction. So what we're gonna do is, sorry about that. What we're gonna do is we're actually gonna go under details. We're gonna select noise. So we're gonna select noise. Now you see it, and now you don't. This is what we're doing in our laboratories. When it comes to studying sensors, no one can come close to removing digital noise that we can. Don't get me wrong, there's several other manufacturers who get rid of noise, but ask those manufacturers if they're capable of removing dead and hot pixels. It's not gonna happen. Yes, sir, you had a question.
What if you have a whole lot of, you haven't purchased a DxO 8, you have a lot of processed images already. Can you work off a PSD file and run your DxO 8 on that, or
me personally, I wouldn't recommend that, because then the PSD file's already been processed through ACR, Adobe Camera Raw's converter, and there's certain things that we just don't agree with how they do things, because they just come at it in a mathematical approach. Not only are we coming at it in a mathematical approach, but we also attack it from a scientific approach where all the dedicated modules come in hand and actually help us. So in a situation like that, I would probably reprocess that one individual file. In DxO, I would probably process it out as like a DNG. So from that point, it's an open source. And the beauty about our software is that there's no sidecar. The sidecar is pretty much integrated into the file. So wherever you drop that file, all that detailed information is going to go along with you as far as your corrections go. So it's not like you have to go all the way back to the chalkboard, start all over from scratch. No, you can literally take this information with you wherever you go. We go as far back as being compatible with like CS3. If that helps. And we also offer 2 other products, which are plugins. But as far as DxO Optics Pro 8, it's a standalone product. I would probably highly recommend reprocessing that one individual image. And I can guarantee you, you're definitely going to see a difference on the export. Okay, so here goes your noise. So here goes, once again, digital noise at its best, gone. Okay. So now we're gonna also get into another common problem, which is chromatic aberration. We all go through it at some point, and we actually handle it very well. Not only are we capable of removing like the reds, the blues, the greens of chromatic aberration, but we're actually fully capable of removing purple. So I'm actually gonna zoom in, and this is kind of a poor demonstration, but I'm gonna actually, so you can clearly see all the chromatic aberration around the window. There's a lot of purple going on there. So when it comes to chromatic aberration, this is actually more of a optical correction. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna open this optical corrections tab, and then we're gonna get rid of all this chromatic aberration. So we're gonna select chromatic aberration. We're gonna select lateral chromatic aberration. That's right, lateral. Not only can we move it longitude, but we also remove lateral. So that's pretty much up, removing chromatic aberration, and sideways to give you like a really clean image. And now we're gonna get rid of purple. And here goes chromatic aberration as shot after utilizing DxO Optics Pro 8's chromatic aberration feature. Completely gone. Okay. And someone had a really good question about blown out highlights. I don't remember who it was. Okay, cool. Okay, so I promised you that I was gonna show you something really neat. And I'm pretty sure this is going to help you. So right now I'm just tapping into like my main directory. There's no importing involved. This is all being directly pulled from the hard drive. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. Blown out highlights. There's a lot of things. As far as one of the optical flaws that we correct for, such as distortion. Okay, so here's an image that I took in Europe. There's a major distortion going on. We can clearly see it. It's clear as day, right? This was actually taken off of my 1DS Mark II utilizing a 15mm fisheye lens by Sigma. So the software is automatically recognizing the lens combination and the camera combination through the EXIF information. So we went from here to here. So I'm pretty sure you can spend endless minutes in all these overwhelming post-production softwares trying to straighten this out, or you could just let us do all the corrections for you. Yes, sir?
I have a question. Now the vertical lines towards the edges,
Mm-hmm.
a little like falling out.
Yeah.
See where doors are?
Yes.
Can you correct that?
Yeah, you can actually, we actually have full control over your X and Y values where you can stretch the rubber band per se is how I like to say it. And you can recover those edges. But we also have a really nifty tool that helps with this type of distortion as well as perspective control issues that if we have time, I'll show you. But what I really wanted to show you was the concern that you had in reference to blown out highlights. Okay, so we're gonna go to the DxO default. So right now, perfect example. Okay, how many of us have been at a job where we've been shooting, and then all of a sudden we turn this way and we either forget to fix or adjust our f-stop or ISO? Anyone's been there? Okay, I guess I'm there. I've been there all the time. Let's be realistic. We've all made that mistake at least once. So we're actually gonna bring out this image and we're gonna bring it back to life because this is pretty much all I had to work with. Mom saw the Italian marble in the background, but if you look very closely, that Italian marble is completely blown out. There's no information there. So the first thing that I'm gonna do in order to recover this information, I'm definitely gonna rely on my DxO Smart Lighting tool. So if you could keep your main focus attention on the drapes, I'm actually gonna make it seem as if someone was actually holding a fill-in light for me on the opposite direction. So we're actually gonna switch over to strong, bring these drapes back to life, right? What we're gonna do now is we're actually gonna go down and I'm gonna rely on my color rendering. That's just because I love color. So we're gonna go to camera body type and then I'm gonna select that 5D Mark II that was used in order to capture this image. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna recover those blown out highlights because someone had a concern. So let's, hold on, let's center. And now I'm going to go to my selective tone tool. And recover that information. And then, okay, so we can actually make out the infrastructure on the marble now. We can actually make out the gray accent in the marble. And I'm going to show you what it looked like when it was captured. Yeah, this is image processing software at its best. I mean, this is software that's completely working for you and not against you by any means. I mean, it would have took me at least a couple of layer masks in order to bring this out in like Photoshop or something like that. And not even then would I be able to get all those fine like lines in the marble. I would have actually created that in Photoshop using like, I don't know, the paint tool or something like that. You gotta cut corners when you can, right? Okay, just out of curiosity, does anyone have like any questions or concerns or? I'm actually going to give you another example for some chromatic aberration at its very worst at that. And I don't really even have to zoom close on this image for you to see it. I mean, it's just as clear as day, but let's get in on some of that nasty purple. I mean, it's just purple and blue everywhere, right? So we're going to go into optical corrections. We're going to tap into chromatic aberration. We're going to tap into lateral. We're going to tap into purple fringing. Gone. Went from here to here. So there's other post-production softwares that do a fairly good job, but what makes us so unique is that we're catered to the hardware that you're actually using. Yes, sir?
I have a lot of scanned slides. Can DxO do anything?
Unfortunately, you can't do anything for a scan or a slide, but what you can do, which will help you a little bit, you can actually create your own manual module and then save it as a preset. So yeah, you can, there's a fix, there's a way around it, but it's not dedicated. Yes, sir?
Can you talk about some of the yellow, the warning triangles that are coming up, like next to noise and chromatic aberration, lens softness?
Uh-huh.
What does it indicate?
Oh, the warning. Okay, okay. Well, that's a good question actually. No one's actually bothered to answer. You got a good eye. Okay. The exclamation points, what they're actually saying is that you won't be able to see the difference unless you're at a zoom level of 75% or more. Unless, if you want, you can actually go into DxO Optics Pro 8, you can go under Preferences, and then you can shut that feature off so that you'll just see it at full frame mode. But I would have to admit, it's going to make the hamster run a little bit faster on the wheel, as I like to say. So I just leave it at 75. I actually kind of got used to just zooming in at 75% and then you see it's gone. But then the minute I start coming out 75%, it appears. Until I process out, then you'll be able to see the image completely clear of chromatic aberration.
How about if I use a point and shoot camera?
Ah, no point and shoots, yeah.
What is good?
No, high-end point and shoot cameras, yes. But like a little point and shoot camera you just carry in your pocket, unfortunately, no. You're entitled to 3 installations. So that's your desktop, that's your laptop, and let's say if your buddy's sitting next to you and you're nice enough, you can give him your 3rd installation. One of the features when it comes to DxO Optics Pro is perspective control issues. A lot of people have them. I mean, I have them sometimes. So yes, we do offer an extremely strong solution for perspective control issues, and I'm going to show you this right now. So there's two tools that we offer. You can actually utilize the keystoning tools in DxO Optics Pro 8, which you can actually see the keystoning tools right up on top. We also just recently developed a new application called Viewpoint. Viewpoint was purposely designed for the aerial, the wedding, the architect, and there's one more architect, and interior photographer. Because if you think about those 4 different photographers, they all share that one common flaw, perspective control issues, right? So I'm going to show you some perspective control issue techniques in DxO Optics Pro 8, and then I'll show you Viewpoint. Viewpoint's a little bit stronger because it gives you about 35% more fine-tuning control as far as how you can shift.
Is that a separate software?
Yes, that is a separate software. Okay, so first we're going to get into perspective control issues in DxO Optics Pro 8. So what we're going to do is we're going to look up some good images. So this is a good image right here. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to default. Okay, perfect example. We got some major issues going on. We have some horizon issues, and those buildings look like they're falling backwards, which is a major issue. So the very first thing that I would do is, in order to correct this flaw, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump into my customization tab, and I'm actually going to tap into our keystoning tools, which you can locate them right up on top of our taskbar. we have the horizon tool, we have our force parallel tool, and then we actually, yes, we actually can read rectangular shapes, which is a really, really nice thing to have when you're in a tight situation. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fix my horizon. So I'm actually going to use that line on the swimming pool. Straighten that out, right? We got 1 point straight. Now, what if he tells me, you know what, Hector, that's great, the horizon's fixed, but those buildings are still falling backwards. I need them to sit right side up. Okay, Skyrun's a hard bargain, but I got to give him what he wants because he's the client. He's the one paying for the job. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to utilize my force parallel tool, and I'm going to look for the strongest parallel line. So obviously it's a no-brainer that one line right here is the strongest, and the second one that I'm going to go for is right here. So I'm going to select this one, close it out. There you go. Okay? So that's what we're doing for perspective control issues. Now, if you're just, let's say you don't need DxO Optics Pro, you're just a photographer who, like for him, his concern was perspective control issues. So we have a special product just for him called Viewpoint. So I'm actually going to give you one of the most overwhelming situations that you could possibly run into. So let's go into, let's jump out of DxO and let's go into Viewpoint, right? This is another perspective control issue. Not only will it help you with like tilted horizons, slanted buildings, but it will also help you with anamorphosis issues. Really fancy word, I know, anamorphosis, warping issues, plain and simple. So we're actually going to look up some really good demonstrations for some perspective control issues. So let me see what I can dig up. Okay. This one's a nightmare. This is some major perspective control issues going on here, right? And the average person would be like, where do I start? Where do I begin? So we try to make the interface so user-friendly where it literally just speaks to you. And this is just strictly for perspective control issues. Someone such as himself who has these major issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. What we're going to do is we're actually going to go into keystoning. We're going to tap keystoning, and we're going to select our rectangle tool. And let's be realistic. If you've all seen a 5-year-old work an iPad, how hard is it to work a control point, right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to align these control points and cut our workflow in half. So just keep in mind how un-users-friendly that perspective control tool can be in certain applications. Don't need to name any names, or the free transformation tool, or the warping tool. You know, you make the slightest adjustment on that stylus or the slightest adjustment on that mouse and the whole image just, you know, flops. So let's sit it right side up. So what if he's the client? He's like, hey, Hector, you know what? The ground just looks like it's spitting out the ground. You know, the client, we need grass. We need to know that there's actually a foundation under this building. The client's always right. This is the beauty about DxO. Not only are we giving you laboratory results, but at your own discretion, you can fine tune to your own liking. And there goes his grass. Yeah, absolutely. See, that's another thing that we've done major improvements on for all our latest software. Our cache performance is by far 3 times faster. This is like all real-time rendering. There's no, let me make an adjustment, wait for the wheel to spin and spin and spin, let me go make some coffee, let me go make a phone call, go back to the computer. It's still spinning and spinning. No, we understand that post-production and image processing is an issue. We do realize that you do have lives and you need to conduct moving forward with your business. So we provide you with some of the most demanding image processing tools that's going to work for you and completely not against you. So, and here goes your before and after. Okay. We've all seen images like this at least once or twice where the building's falling backwards, right? But thanks to DxO, it's no longer an issue. what we're going to do is we're actually going to control our control points and put them exactly right where they need to be. So that's one. Here goes the second one. And you guys ready for it? On one, on two, and there she goes. And the beauty about it is, unlike other post-production tools, we actually give you the full capability of utilizing your whole entire canvas size. So opposed to other post-production companies, they don't. They actually restrict you on how much of that canvas you can actually utilize. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm just gonna crop out on that water, crop out on that. And for you guys shooting, you know, these high caliber DSLRs with like really strong image processing power, where output's no longer an issue and you can crop for days, this is what you end up with. And here goes your before, here goes your after. Yeah, I was a sloppy crop. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Just out of curiosity, like how many of us today shoot black and white? Just out of curiosity, any black and white shooters in here? Okay, cool. Okay, so maybe I can show you something else that you might be able to utilize. We actually have a really nice feature called really nice software actually called FilmPack. What FilmPack is, it's actually one of the most sophisticated emulating softwares. That's right, emulating. We're not mimicking, we're not simulating, we're actually emulating actual analog film, which is really nice. So for all you hardcore film shooters out there, if you're looking for a solution that's actually gonna give you that film look, this is the solution you need to be using. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna pull up an image, and I always like this one. I'm more of a black and white guy, so I'm gonna start off in black and white and work my way over to the colors. But before I do that, I'd actually like to explain the process of how we're capable of doing these different types of color rendering. So in our laboratories, what we're doing is, in layman's terms, we're pretty much dissecting film. So what we're doing is we're taking a strip of film, we're pulling it out of these canisters, and we're cutting them. From these strips of films, we're actually dissecting them into 4 different pieces. From these 4 different pieces, we're actually emulating for different types of rendering. You have your contrast, you have your saturation, you have your color, and the main reason why people actually buy FilmPack, actual film grain, which is really nice. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna zoom into a 1:1 ratio so we can focus on this cute little girl's cheek. That's about right, 130%, why not? Okay, so that's good. Okay, so if you could be so kind enough just to keep your main focus attention just on the little girl's cheek, I'm actually gonna start going through these different black and white emulating renderings. So this is what APX 100 would look like. This is what 25 would look like, Neopan. And obviously, as you can clearly see, as I will, you can actually see that film grain dancing around. One of my favorite films growing up shooting, I used to shoot like a lot of T-Max 3200 and T-Max 100. So T-Max 3200, right? It's either you loved it or you hate it. It was always one of those mixed emotion films. It was either, you know, it's just way too much contrast or just way too much noise. This is the beauty about DxO, FilmPack. Not only do we give you full capability of controlling your channel mixer, where you can create your own custom looks, but we actually tell the difference apart digital noise, where you can see the noise levels have been completely dropped because I don't want digital noise. What I want is actual film grain. This is what I'm looking for. So let's say, for instance, this gentleman in the third row who's been asking good questions today, and he tells me, you know what, Hector, I love how it looks, I love the color, I love the saturation, but the grain's just killing me. It's just way too much grain. And I can tell him, okay, this is more of a personal preference, but I understand. We can actually go into film grain, and we can actually control the film grain in real time. There's no processing. And this is not a video. This is all being done in real time. And that's the beauty about Film Pack. We're actually bringing back dead stock film back to life. Now we're going to go into the color negatives, and we're just going to show what we have to offer in the color negatives. We have Vista 200, we have Superior, Fuji, Elite 400, 160 NC, whoever, I mean, who didn't use that? Filmography. Now let's go into the color positive films. Agfa 100. There was your Fiji at 100F, your 100C, Provia, 400, Sensia. You know, or let's just say someone comes to me and tells me, hey, Hector, you know what? I could care less for film. I'm not part of the film era. I want to create my own little, you know, weird color renderings and create my own different looks. You can do that in DxO Film Pack, which is really nice. So we can create our own creative presets. And the beauty about creating your own presets is, like, let's say we all have Film Pack in this one room and we all create our own individual preset. We can actually share that preset with everyone in this room. It's kind of like a users group just sharing free information with one another. So here's some of the creative presets that I've created. And I would have to admit, I use a lot of these for like friends' weddings and stuff like that because they just work. Or even if you want to do like colorizations, you're capable of doing colorizations, but you would have to utilize the channel mixer in order to create this look. You would, you know, shut down all the color channels that you don't want, and you would bring up the channel levels that you want to bring out. In this situation, I brought out her skin tones, and then I got rid of all the green. Yes, sir?
How would you coordinate this with a printer? Do you have test targets in there where you can print a, say, a grayscale or a color patch to make sure that the colors were...
Okay, that's actually a really, really good question, and I like your style. Okay, in a situation like that, the best thing that I would suggest, honestly, you would have to purchase a device called a spectrocolorimeter. What a spectrocolorimeter does, it creates a custom ICC profile for any RGB-driven printer on the market. There are several spectrocolorimeters on the market. And if you could approach me after the class, I'd be more than happy to recommend the one that I personally use. But the one that I personally use can read up to 927 patches of color, up to 225 shades of black, white, and gray. That's what you need. Yeah, that's what you need. And then yes, whatever you see on your monitor display is what's going to get spit out in that on the receiving end of the printer. Because what happens with these commercial printers, there's different types of rendering intents. And just one of these rendering intents, I'm pretty sure you've learned the hard way, can completely throw off your print. Where I've taken 20 by 30s, looked this way and gone like that because the color just wasn't right. And we're talking about 25 sheet of paper plus ink. You're talking 45, 50 bucks easy, just on raw materials. And then we have our custom presets where you just keep creating all these individual looks. But yeah, in a situation like that, in order to retrieve really on point black and whites, spectrocolorimeter, that's what you're looking for. When you purchase DxO Optics Pro 8, we actually, as like a kickback, we actually give you a couple of black and white emulated looks. You don't get the full emulated looks that you get in Film Pack. We just give you a taste of the film looks that we have to offer. So let me show you some of the ones that we have to offer. Let me see, where can I go? Let's go into some monkeys. We all like monkeys. I like monkeys. Okay, So here's an image that was processed already. And I'm going to show you as it was shot. And this is after it was processed in DxO Optics Pro 8. So now we want to convert this image into a black and white, as this gentleman had stated. So in DxO Optics Pro 8, you actually have a couple of preset black and whites, and as well as negative and positive films. With Film Pack, you get 60 analog looks and 25 creative looks, plus the availability to manipulate your channel mixer. So we're going to go into black and white, and of course I'm going to stick to one of my favorites, T-Max 100. And there goes your pretty monkey. Black and white. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I love the color rendering tool, because it helps. And keep in mind, sir, this is actually being written to raw information. We're not like other post-production companies where they create like all these layer masks or duplicate layers with digital noise on them in the forms of a monochrome, and then they flatten it, and then it's supposedly supposed to be a black and white, but in actuality it really isn't. It's close, but not close enough.
And does the standalone Film Pack work with raw images as well?
Film Pack, no. Film Pack does not work off of raw files. What you would have to do in order for Film Pack to work off of raw files, you would open up your raw, you would make all your corrections, and then apply your corrections, apply your black and white to that correction file. So that's what we do. The only way you can do it is if you have DxO Optics Pro 8. Okay, so let's say we're ready to go, right? Say you're like, hey Hector, I want to process this image. How do you want to process it out? TNG, a TIFF, JPEG, what do you want? Got them all for you. So let's just say there's no sense in processing this out in Adobe Camera Raw, because I've already processed it out in a converter that's by far, you know, a little bit by far stronger. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to process this out as a 16-bit TIFF, and then I'm actually going to have it dropped onto, let's just say, my desktop, right? Okay, so it's already at my desktop. So there's two things you can do. You can actually go up, you're going to select your image, and you can go up to your taskbar where it says process selected image, or if you're lazy like I am, you can just drag and drop. I like to drag and drop. It's just so much more quicker. So keep in mind, all these corrections that are being made in under 30 seconds. We're correcting for noise, we're correcting for distortion, we're correcting for chromatic aberration, we're correcting for noise, we're also correcting for lens softness. And that image has already been finished processing before I even got to finish that. But now I want to take it into Photoshop, right? Okay, so we're not going to tell you, oh, leave this application, find the image, drag it into Photoshop. There's nothing post-productive about that. We're just wasting time. So in a situation like that, what I would do is I would actually right-click. I would open my output image with. I would select the post-production software of my choice. In this situation, it just so happens to be Photoshop. I'm going to hit that export button. As I hit that export button, Photoshop is actually going to launch, and here goes your pretty image. And there goes your file, ready to go. So this file, keep in mind, is free of artifacts such as distortion, things of that nature. Now we actually have a really good source to work off of, a source that's actually free from artifacts. And this is the proper way of post-production software.
Any problem, setting it up in Lightroom as an external editor?
No, that's actually really cool, and I'm happy you actually asked that question. See, we don't want to interfere with anyone's post-production workflow. We want to work for you, not against you. So in a situation like that, you can do two things. But I will guarantee you, once you start using DxO Optics Pro 8, you're not going to use really Lightroom for much. I mean, the only two things you're going to find yourself using Lightroom for, which is the only reasons why I personally use Lightroom, creating HTML and Flash templates, which I think is really nice, through their web development, and shooting tethered. Those are the only two things that I'm actually using Lightroom for right now. Those two.
Say for your RAWs, edit them in DxO,
Mhm.
export as a TIFF, bring it back into Lightroom, you're not going to lose any quality that way, are you?
No, that's actually the right way of doing. Start with us first, get the best image quality as possible, drag it over to Lightroom. Let's just say, for instance, you tell me like, oh, Hector, I've been creating like Lightroom catalogs for years. You're killing me right now. I don't want to go back and, you know, start all over. Okay, you don't have to. Easy. What you're going to do is actually you're going to go into your Organize tab. You're going to open up your folder where you can either create projects, either tap into your Lightroom or Aperture cataloging system. And then from there, you just work off of that directory, send it right back where it needs to go. So I think we're about closing it up. I just want to thank everyone so much for coming in and tuning in. My name's Hector Martinez. You're more than welcome to stop at our website. Our website's DxOLabs.com. You're more than welcome to also come up afterwards if you have any questions or concerns, because I don't know how much more longer we can stay in this one room before they kick us out. But once again, thank you so much for stopping by and tuning in.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.